It was 1 a.m. My eyes felt heavy from the relentless weight of the day. After a long, exhausting shift, I sank onto the sofa, hoping to escape the world, even if just for a few hours. Being a cop in this town isn't always about life and death situations. But tonight, it had been a fight at a downtown bar, broken up, reports written, and now, here I was, my body begging for rest outside. The usual chaos of the neighborhood continued unabated. Dogs barked, a motorcycle roared past, and the kids on the corner probably hadn't even thought about sleep. I tried to ignore it, let it wash over me like white noise, as my eyelids grew heavier by the second, but then, knock knock knock. At first, it was a faint tap, almost too weak to be real. I barely registered it. But then came the second, more forceful knock, like the sound of someone desperate, someone in pain. I froze. No one ever knocks at this hour. My instincts as a cop kicked in immediately. Heart racing, I scrambled to the door. I grabbed the nearest chair, just in case. As I reached the entrance, I barely recognized the voice. A trembling, panicked whisper. "Mom, open up, please." I didn't hesitate. I unlocked the door with trembling hands, and there she was. Sarah. My daughter. She collapsed into my arms, shaking uncontrollably. I could barely hold her up. Her body felt limp, like a rag doll, and my heart stopped. Sarah?" I whispered, barely able to speak. "What happened to you, honey?" The dim porch light highlighted the horror that was her face. Her lip was split, the blood dried and cracking at the corner. Her left eye was swollen, almost shut. The bruises on her face made it hard to breathe. And then I saw it, her hands clutching her stomach, as if the pain was too much to bear. I couldn't take it anymore, Mom," she sobbed, her voice barely above a whisper. "Robert. He hit me? Because of his mistress." A wave of rage and heartbreak crashed through me. Robert, my son-in-law, the man I had trusted, the man I had welcomed into my home, had done this. My mind raced. How could he? How had I not seen the signs? But the worst part? He wasn't just a man who hurt my daughter, he was a man who shattered everything I thought I knew. The shock ran through me, but I forced myself to stay composed. I helped her inside, steadying her as we moved across the threshold. The moment she was settled on the sofa, I didn't waste a second. I knew what I had to do. Without a word, I went straight to my police uniform, my hands shaking as I buttoned up. The cold metal of my gun felt different now. More personal. I loaded the bullets, the weight of what was about to happen sinking in. I had just received the worst possible news. And now, I was ready to make sure Robert never hurt her again. I dialed my lawyer's number. "Start the plan now," I said, my voice icy and resolved, because nothing would stop me from getting justice for my daughter. And as you're watching this, I want to know, where are you listening to my story from? Leave a comment and let me know. The storm was coming. And it was time for Robert to face the consequences. I sat beside Sarah, my heart pounding in my chest, but I couldn't tear my eyes away from her. She was broken, physically and emotionally. Her sobs filled the room, each one like a knife, sharp and devastating. I gently wiped away a tear from her cheek, trying to steady her, but the tremors in her body didn't stop. She tried to speak, her voice fragile, barely above a whisper. "I didn't want to bother you, Mom." I tried to stay strong. But I couldn't anymore. Her words cracked, and she buried her face in her hands. "Robert, he hit me." The words echoed in my mind like a deafening roar. Robert? The man who I'd once seen as family? The man who had promised to care for her, protect her? He had done this to my daughter. I couldn't breathe. I pulled her close, holding her tight as if my embrace could somehow erase the pain, but it didn't. Nothing could. I needed to know the details, but I wasn't sure I was strong enough to hear them. And yet, I had to. For Sarah. "Tell me, honey," I whispered, my voice shaky but calm. "What happened?" Sarah's voice trembled as she spoke, the weight of her words breaking me. "He hit me because of her. Denise, his mistress. He said I was making his life miserable, and when I confronted him..." Her breath hitched. "He slapped me. Then punched me in the stomach. He said if I didn't stop being a burden, he'd make sure I'd never get in the way again." I felt my blood run cold. Her words were like daggers, each one more painful than the last. I could see it now, the bruises on her face weren't just from a single slap. They were the marks of months, maybe longer, of violence. Her eye, purple and swollen, her split lip, and that sickening bruise on her stomach, it wasn't just abuse. It was cruelty. She paused, wiping her eyes, then whispered the words that shattered me the most. "He told me I was nothing. That I should be grateful he even stayed with me this long. And then he pushed me out of the house. He said he didn't need me anymore." I clenched my fists, the rage bubbling inside me like a wildfire. How dare he? How dare he do this to my daughter, the girl I had raised with so much love and care? This man, this monster who had preyed on her, wasn't just a son-in-law to me. He was the enemy. I fought to hold back my tears, forcing my voice to stay steady. I'm so sorry, sweetheart, I whispered, brushing her hair back. But we're going to fix this. I swear we will. I stood up, the cold realization hitting me. This wasn't just about bruises. This was about a lifetime of fear, of control, and of pain that I couldn't let continue. Not on my watch. Without another word, I grabbed my phone and dialed the number I knew by heart, the number of the one man who could help me now. My lawyer. James Ellison. Start the plan now, I said, my voice firm with determination. There was no more waiting. No more hesitation. I was done being silent. As I hung up, I glanced at Sarah, who was resting her head against the couch, eyes heavy with exhaustion. I promised her, quietly, but with the certainty of a mother's heart. Justice is coming for him. Sarah. And I will make sure he pays. As Sarah slept, her body still shaking from the night's horrors, I sat in the dim light of the living room, my mind racing. I could still hear her sobs echoing in my ears, feel the weight of her pain pressing on my chest. It hurt so much, too much. My heart ached for the daughter I had raised, for the little girl who once ran to me with laughter in her eyes, now reduced to this broken woman hiding in my home. I had promised to protect her. But how? How could I fix what Robert had done to her? I glanced at the front door, imagining what she must have felt when she had come running to me in the dead of night, battered and desperate. Her bruises were more than just physical scars. They were marks of betrayal from the man she had once called her husband. I felt a boiling rage surge inside me, but it was more than anger. It was a sense of responsibility, duty. As a mother, I couldn't let this go on. But as a police officer, I knew what had to be done. The line between mother and cop had never been more blurred. I had taken an oath to uphold the law, to bring justice to those who couldn't protect themselves. But now, it wasn't just about enforcing the law. It was about protecting my daughter and making sure Robert faced the consequences for his violence. Could I separate my emotions from the role I was sworn to perform? A sense of urgency stirred within me, and the internal struggle melted away. The time for silence was over. My daughter was in danger, and I would use every tool at my disposal to protect her. I stood up, the weight of the decision heavy on my shoulders. Slowly, I walked into the bedroom, where my police uniform hung neatly in the closet. I could feel my pulse quicken as I reached for the blue shirt, the khaki pants, and the badge that had always symbolized my duty. One by one, I slipped into the uniform, each movement deliberate. Each piece of clothing a step closer to the woman I was becoming, a woman who would no longer stand by. The sound of the belt buckling, the cold weight of the gun holster at my side, was like the closing of a door on the old me. The mother who had suffered in silence was gone. Now, I was ready for battle. I stood in front of the mirror, looking at the reflection of a woman who had been shattered by love but was now resolute. The woman staring back at me wasn't just Sarah's mother. She was a police officer, and she was determined to make Robert pay, without a second thought. I grabbed the phone and dialed James Ellison's number once again. This starts now, I said. My voice steady, my resolve clear. As I hung up, I felt the weight of my decision settle over me. The fight was no longer just for Sarah's safety. It was for justice. And I would use everything I had to make sure Robert couldn't hurt her, or anyone else. Again, the hospital's sterile, cold air did nothing to calm the storm inside me. Every step toward the emergency room felt like an eternity, each moment stretching out longer than the last. Sarah, still pale and trembling, leaned heavily on me as we walked through the stark hallways. Her small, fragile body seemed so small against the chaos of my thoughts. As I guided her to the examination room, my heart weighed down by an unbearable mixture of anger and fear, I tried to focus on the task at hand. This wasn't just about getting Sarah the care she desperately needed, it was about something far larger now. It was about collecting the evidence, the proof, the things that would make Robert pay for what he had done. I couldn't let the police system, the same system I had worked for all these years, fail us. Not now. I looked at Sarah, her face streaked with tears, her body contorted in pain, yet she was still trying to hold it all in. The bruises on her face, the deep purple on her left eye, were too much to ignore. But it was her silence that cut me deepest. She wouldn't let me photograph her injuries. She wouldn't even let me look at her bruises on her stomach when she was so obviously in pain. A nurse ushered us into a dimly lit room, and Sarah was gently laid down on a bed. I stayed by her side, feeling helpless and angry at once. The room seemed too quiet, the low hum of the fluorescent lights only heightening the tension. I watched as the doctor, Leticia Figueroa, examined Sarah with an expression of concern. Sarah, she said softly, I'm going to need to check for fractures. We'll need an X-ray. Your ribs might be cracked. My heart clenched at her words. I turned away for a moment, steeling myself against the overwhelming flood of emotions threatening to break through. But I couldn't look away for long. I needed to be strong, for Sarah. As the nurse prepped Sarah for the X-ray, I knew the pain wasn't just physical. It couldn't be. The bruises, the cuts, they would heal. But the wounds inside her, the ones that would never be seen on an X-ray, were the ones that terrified me the most. The trauma, the constant fear. The bruises on her soul. The minutes felt like hours as I waited in the sterile, quiet hallway, my mind racing. Sarah's sobs, the whispers of pain and fear that had slipped from her lips during the ride here, echoed in my ears. How could Robert have done this? How could someone I trusted betray my daughter like this? I wiped away a tear that I hadn't realized had fallen, and in that moment, I knew, this was just the beginning. I would make sure he faced the full weight of what he had done. No more silence, no more hiding. When the X-ray results came in, Dr. Figueroa returned, her face serious. "There are no fractures," she said, almost with a sigh of relief. "But the contusions, the bruises, they tell a story of violence." She wasn't talking about just the physical injuries anymore. We both knew that. She was talking about the hidden scars. The ones that might never fade. I gathered my strength as she began documenting the injuries. I silently pulled out my phone, capturing each bruise, each mark. This evidence would be the cornerstone of the battle that had already begun. We weren't just fighting for Sarah's body anymore. We were fighting for her soul. And no matter what it took, I was ready. As I looked down at my daughter's tired, broken face, I realized that we were walking into something far bigger than just a case of domestic violence. This was about justice, and I wouldn't stop until Robert faced the consequences of his actions. The war had begun, and it would only get worse from here. The hospital room felt suffocating, the air heavy with the tension of the battle that was just beginning. As Sarah drifted off into a fragile sleep, I couldn't shake the image of her bruised face, the deep, painful reminder of Robert's cruelty. The numbness inside me had started to fade, replaced by something fiercer, darker. It was a cold resolve, a burning determination to make Robert pay for everything he had done. I stood at the foot of her bed, silently snapping pictures of every bruise, every broken mark left on her body. The flash from my camera felt like a warning, like the first step toward a truth that would shatter everything. Each click of the shutter was one more piece of evidence, a small but deliberate strike against the man I had once trusted. These images, this proof, they would not be ignored. But as I catalogued Sarah's physical wounds, something else started to gnaw at me. The more I looked at the evidence, the more I realized it wasn't just about bruises. Robert had done worse than hurt Sarah. He had lied. He had manipulated, destroyed. There were cracks in the foundation of everything I thought I knew about him. And now, as a cop, I had a responsibility to uncover the truth, every ugly, disgusting layer. I picked up my phone, dialing James Ellison, our family's lawyer. The voice on the other end of the line was groggy, but he listened intently as I explained what had happened, detailing Sarah's injuries. "I'll be there this afternoon to gather everything," I said, my tone firm. "I'll be ready," he replied, but I could hear the skepticism in his voice. He knew this wasn't just a simple domestic abuse case. It was much bigger than that. I glanced at the stack of documents on the table. The police report from last night, Sarah's medical files, the video from Miss Camila's camera. And then it hit me, Robert wasn't just a violent man. He was a thief. A liar. The thought bubbled up from deep within me, a whisper at first, but then it grew louder, until I couldn't ignore it. The land, the family land, my father's legacy. Robert had never cared for it. He had never appreciated its value. But now, I wondered if he had been scheming behind our backs, trying to steal it. The images of Sarah's battered face, the cold look on Robert's as he stood over her, were all starting to connect. What if Robert was using her for something bigger? It wasn't just about Sarah anymore. It wasn't even just about Robert's violence. If he was capable of this level of deception, he could be capable of anything. I felt a surge of anger rise inside me, but I tamped it down. Focusing on the task at hand, I grabbed the land papers that had been sitting on the kitchen counter for weeks. The ones I had ignored, not suspecting anything. My eyes ran over them again, but this time, something was wrong. The signatures. They weren't ours. He had forged our names. A cold chill ran down my spine. The betrayal was far deeper than I had thought. Robert had stolen from us, not just our peace of mind, but something far more important. The legacy my father had built was at risk. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. I locked the documents in my drawer and turned back to Sarah, still asleep on the bed. The battle lines had been drawn. I wasn't just fighting for Sarah's safety anymore. I was fighting to protect everything we had worked for, the truth, our family, our legacy. The fight was about to get much, much bigger. And this time, I was ready for whatever Robert threw my way. The first steps had been taken. And there was no turning back. The morning light filtered weakly through the curtains, casting a soft glow over the room where Sarah still lay, caught between sleep and the remnants of pain. My mind, however, was far from calm. The documents I had found last night, the forged land transfer papers, kept replaying in my mind, each letter on that paper a direct attack on everything I held dear. It wasn't just the bruises on Sarah's body anymore. This was deeper. This was personal. Robert had stolen something far more precious than I had ever imagined. The family land, my father's legacy, wasn't just a plot of dirt. It was history. It was memories. It was my father's sweat, his blood, and every drop of love he had poured into it. And Robert? He had turned it into a pawn in a game I never knew he was playing. He'd forged our signatures, turning something sacred into a commodity. I felt the weight of this discovery settle in my chest like a boulder. How could I have been so blind? How could I have trusted him? He wasn't just abusing Sarah, he was betraying everything my family had worked for. The bile in my throat was bitter, sharp. I walked across the room, the land papers in my hand, and felt my fingers tremble with a rage I hadn't known I was capable of. I had already known Robert to be a liar, a cheat. But this? This was something far worse. This wasn't just about a violent man hurting my daughter. This was a calculated attempt to erase the legacy of our family, to steal what was never his to take. It wasn't just physical abuse now. It was financial, psychological, complete and utter betrayal. I forced myself to sit at the kitchen table, trying to calm the chaos in my mind. Every instinct told me to go straight to the police, but this was bigger than that. Robert had connections, he had influence. He wasn't just some low-life thug in a small town. No, Robert was dangerous, and confronting him would put me and Sarah in even greater danger, but I couldn't back down. Not now. Not when I knew what I knew. I pulled out my phone and dialed James Ellison. When his groggy voice answered, I didn't waste any time. James, I've got more than just bruises and hospital bills. Robert is stealing from us. He's forged documents to take the land. There was a long silence on the other end. Are you sure? He asked, his voice low and cautious. That's a serious accusation, Elizabeth. I've got the papers, I said, my voice hardening with conviction. I'll bring them over to you. We need to make sure this is locked down. If he gets away with this, we lose everything. The anger coursing through me now was like fire, hot, unrelenting. I knew I had to act fast, but I also knew the risk of confronting Robert was huge. He had power here. He had people who would back him. And though I was a cop, I wasn't invincible. But in that moment, nothing else mattered. He had already taken so much from Sarah. He had already made her feel small, broken, and worthless. Now, he had crossed a line I could never forgive. With every passing second, the stakes grew higher. The more I learned about Robert, the more I understood how dangerous he truly was. But the fury inside me? That was a fire I wasn't going to let burn out. He had hurt my daughter, stolen from our family, and manipulated his way into a life of lies. It was time to tear it all down. The moment to confront him was coming closer, and this time, it wouldn't be the man I once thought was family who walked away unscathed. It would be Robert who would pay. And I was going to make sure of it. The bell over the pawn shop door rasped like a warning as I stepped inside. The air smelled of oil and stale smoke. The men who worked for Robert glanced up with the bored indifference of people who think they own the world. Behind the counter, Robert was a study in false comfort, a man practicing charm the way others practice prayer. When he saw me, his smile arrived too quick, too sharp. Elizabeth, he drawled, folding his hands as if this were a social call. What brings the mother-in-law today? Got nothing better to do? My voice was quiet, the kind that settles a room because it hides the storm beneath. I set the folder on his desk and pushed it across until it stopped at his fingertips. The paper's corner made a soft scrape that sounded like a judge's gavel to me. Open it. He did. His face changed the way thunder changes a sky. Slow, almost amused at first, then cold. Photos slid out, close-ups of Sarah's split lip, the livid bruise on her abdomen, the time-stamped frame from Miss Camilla's camera. A photocopy of the land transfer, the shaky forged signatures, a ledger with numbers circled in red. For a moment he stared at the proof the way a gambler stares at a losing hand. Then the arrogance returned. Little papers, he laughed, waving them as if they were fly specks. You think this scares me? I have better lawyers than you. You'll regret dragging this town into a circus. His henchmen shifted forward like shadows obeying a single command. The air tightened. I could smell the cheap cologne and desperation. My hand slid into my jacket, not for a weapon but for the badge I'd kept folded against my chest. I laid it on the desk so he could see the metal and weight of what I represented. This isn't about you scaring me, I said. This is about the law. About my daughter. Your threats don't make the bruises disappear. They make you guilty, loud and clear. Robert's laugh scraped off. He stood, rocking the desk with his movement, the metal coins clinking like a countdown. You think a badge will always save you? You forget who runs things here. People fear me. People listen to me. Something in his tone blurred into something crueler, more dangerous. He leaned forward. If you keep poking, Elizabeth, you won't be protecting anyone. Not your daughter. Not yourself. I felt the caution in the room like humidity, but I also felt the rope I'd been tightening for weeks: evidence, witnesses, lawyers, a commander who had promised to act. I collected the folder slowly, each movement deliberate, like sealing a verdict. My voice was the same low calm: "From now on, the rules have changed. The law will decide. You will answer for what you've done." Outside, the dusty wind kicked up the street. I walked out past the gawking men, past the truck parked under the neon sign, and for the first time since Sarah had knocked on my door, the anger in me settled into a cold, controlled focus. I called James before I even turned the car key. "If you want to see how this plays out, how a man with power falls when truth finds teeth, stay with me. Hit like, subscribe, and let's finish this together." The night air was thick with cigarette smoke and faint traces of tequila as I slid into a shadowed corner of the small bar on Hidalgo Street. Ranchera music rattled through the walls, but my focus was sharp, trained, and unyielding. I had one purpose tonight: find Denise. The woman who had caused my daughter's pain. Yet who also carried her own chains under Robert's control. She appeared like a flame in the dim light, a tight red dress, painted lips, cocktail in hand, striding with a confidence that barely masked her unease. My pulse quickened, not from fear, but from the gravity of the move I was about to make. Every second counted. Every wrong word could push her back into Robert's orbit. I approached, calm but firm, and slid an envelope across the table. The clatter of its contents was deliberate. Inside were documents she could not ignore: the forged land transfer with our signatures, a bank statement exposing her mounting debts, evidence of Robert's promises that had been empty. "Look closely," I said, my voice measured. "Robert has been using you. If you stay with him, you fall with him. If you cooperate, you save yourself." Her laugh started sharp and defiant, but it faltered as her eyes caught the numbers and read: the forged signatures. The risk she had been dragged into without full understanding. The fear in her gaze was genuine, but so was the spark of realization. She had been played. "You have a choice," I continued, softer now, appealing to the rational and the moral. "The police commander already knows everything. The trial will call you. You can testify honestly and protect yourself, or you can continue being a pawn in his lies." Her hand trembled on the glass. She downed her drink in a gulp, as if to steel herself. Finally, she whispered, "Robert promised me everything would be mine. But now I see he lied. I want out." I let a sliver of relief slip through. She understood, and that understanding could turn the tide. But I also knew trust was fragile. One misstep could undo everything. "Testify. Be truthful. I will protect you as much as I can," I said firmly. Before I left, the bar door swung open. Two of Robert's henchmen scanned the room. Denise froze. I slid my badge onto the table, a quiet assertion of authority that made them hesitate, reluctant to intervene. Denise exhaled, a pale shadow of tension giving way to determination. "See?" I said gently, "He cannot shield you. He can only drag you down. The choice is yours." Her nod was hesitant, trembling, but resolute. That single moment, that choice, shifted the game. Robert's safety net had been cut. The trial could now expose everything. If Denise stood firm. I left the bar that night with the weight of the plan pressing on me, but a flicker of hope burned inside. One piece of the puzzle was finally in place. Justice had a chance. If we played it right. The stakes were high. Lives, reputations, and the truth itself hung in the balance. But for the first time since Sarah had knocked on my door that night, I felt the strategy crystallize. The battle lines were drawn. The next move belonged to the law, and to us. The courthouse steps were cold beneath my hands as I held Sarah's close, guiding her inside. The morning light cut sharply across the square, illuminating the faces of townspeople whispering, curious and wary. Today was the day. Every hour of fear, every sleepless night, every bruise and tear would be put to the ultimate test. Inside, the courtroom was packed. Wooden benches groaned under the weight of the crowd, murmurs weaving through the tense air. I spotted Miss Camila in the back row, her nod a small beacon of support amidst the sea of anxious faces. Sarah clung to my hand, her shoulders still tense, but steady. When the judge, Arturo Cervantes, entered, silence fell like a shroud. His gaze swept the room, and the gravity of the moment pressed on me. This was no longer just about revenge, it was about truth, justice, and reclaiming my daughter's dignity. Lawyer James began, his voice steady and commanding. He presented the evidence meticulously: photographs of Sarah's injuries, Dr. Figueroa's medical report, the video from Miss Camila's camera capturing Sarah's desperate knocks at my door, and the forged land documents. Each piece laid bare Robert's cruelty, deception, and audacity. Then came the video. Sarah's sobs echoed through the courtroom. The sound was haunting, raw, and undeniable. Murmurs rippled through the audience, some faces registering shock, others shame, a few disbelief. I placed a steady hand on Sarah's trembling shoulder. "I'm here. I've always been here," I whispered. She drew strength from that small touch. Robert's lawyer, Valdivia, rose sharply, attempting to discredit our case. She fabricated everything. Elizabeth Arriga abused her authority as a police officer to manipulate this court. The words struck like knives, but I remained silent. Evidence spoke louder than lies. James countered with Robert's threatening messages, his attempts to intimidate my daughter, the undeniable proof of manipulation. Then came Denise's testimony. She described Robert's coercion, the pressure to falsify documents, and his empty promises. Each word dismantled the facade he had built. Robert's face turned crimson with anger and fear. He shouted, but the court guards restrained him as the judge's voice rang out, "Order. Sit down, or you will be removed." Finally, it was my turn. I stood, not as a police officer, but as a mother. Every word I spoke was deliberate, unwavering. I will not allow anyone to destroy my daughter and mock the law. That man is not a husband. He is not a father. He is an abuser and a liar. I met Robert's gaze, steel in my eyes. The courtroom murmured, some nodding, others staring in stunned silence. Judge Cervantes's verdict was delivered with solemn clarity: protection orders for Sarah, the nullification of the forged land transfer, and an official investigation into Robert's crimes. The room erupted with whispers. Robert slumped in his chair, pale, defeated, his power stripped away. I took Sarah's hand, guiding her outside into the midday sun. Relief washed over me, a quiet victory settling in my chest. Justice had prevailed, though the scars remained. Today marked the end of Robert's tyranny and the first steps toward healing for my daughter, and for me. The news spread through the town like wildfire. By morning, Robert's pawn shop had been raided, and he was taken into custody. The street outside buzzed with whispers, stares, and a mix of reactions. Some cheered quietly, relief flickering across their faces, while others shook their heads in disbelief, still questioning the events that had unfolded. The man who had once seemed untouchable now sat behind bars, his empire crumbling piece by piece. I wasn't present at the arrest, but when I saw the morning paper, the headline screamed, "Pawn shop owner arrested for domestic violence and land fraud." His face in handcuffs stared back at me from the page, a mix of shock and defeat etched across it. A strange sense of liberation washed over me. He who had betrayed my trust, terrorized my daughter, and manipulated the town was finally facing consequences. Yet, relief was tangled with a bitter undercurrent of sadness. The man I had once considered part of our family, the one I had trusted, had shattered that trust in every possible way. The anger and hurt simmered beneath the surface, a reminder that justice, while served, could not erase the wounds left behind. Denise had disappeared shortly after the trial, rumored to have fled to Monterey to rebuild her life. I couldn't blame her. She, too, had been manipulated and trapped in Robert's web. Even his henchmen, the so-called Los Chamucos, were arrested for witness tampering. Slowly, the neighborhood began to breathe easier. The lingering fear and unspoken threats that had once hung over us dissipated, replaced by cautious calm. Sarah moved in with me permanently. The first nights were rough. She would wake up in terror, drenched in sweat, whispering, "Mom, he's coming." I held her close, whispering assurances, trying to shield her from the ghosts of the past. We both bore the scars, physical and emotional, of the nights that had nearly broken us. Life began to shift gradually. Sarah returned to therapy with Anna's Quiroga, slowly unpacking the trauma that had chained her spirit. Small victories appeared in moments like watching her cook quietly in the kitchen or singing softly to herself. Each act of normalcy was a thread of hope, a tiny stitch mending the frayed edges of her life. Even the town began to change. Neighbors who had once doubted us now approached with hesitant apologies, acknowledging the truth they had been blind to. Miss Camila continued to be a steadfast ally, her presence a gentle reminder that kindness could survive even the darkest times. Yet for me, the victory was complex. Justice had been served, but the betrayal remained a shadow I couldn't shake. I had fought to protect my daughter, to reclaim what was stolen from her, and to expose the lies Robert had spun. But deep down, I knew the scars of deceit and violence could linger far longer than any court order. Relief mingled with sorrow, and in that mixture, a quiet resolve began to take root, to continue standing, to protect, and to ensure that Sarah, and any other victim, would never have to face such darkness alone. In the weeks following Robert's arrest, Sarah began to show signs of life returning to her. At first, they were small moments, a smile that reached her eyes, a gentle laugh when we shared a memory from before the storm. It wasn't much, but it was enough to give me hope. The dark, heavy weight of fear that had clouded her every step was gradually lifting, though it left behind a delicate fragility that needed to be handled with care. The nightmares still haunted her. She would wake in the middle of the night, trembling, whispering his name in terror. I'd pull her close, holding her until the tremors subsided, assuring her that she was safe. But as days passed, her confidence began to return, piece by piece. I saw her start to reclaim the parts of herself that Robert had tried to break, her sense of humor, her spark. Slowly, she resumed little tasks, like cooking breakfast or picking out clothes for the day. These simple acts, once taken for granted, became milestones in her journey of recovery. I took her to Anna's Kuroga, the psychologist James had recommended, every week without fail. Anna's worked with her patiently, guiding her through the layers of trauma, helping Sarah voice the pain that had been locked away for so long. At first, Sarah spoke in hushed tones, reluctant to relive the pain. But over time, with the guidance of Anna's and my constant support, she started opening up. She began to find the strength to confront her fear and the damage it had caused. One afternoon, as I sat in the living room, I heard her humming softly from the kitchen. It was a song I hadn't heard in years, one from her childhood that always filled the house with joy. I stood in the doorway, watching her, a bittersweet tear rolling down my cheek. It was a moment of quiet triumph, my daughter, the woman she was becoming, finally beginning to heal. The sound of her voice, soft and steady, was like a balm for my own wounds. As if the sun was starting to rise in a place that had long been shrouded in darkness. As her mother, I had become both her protector and guide. My role had shifted from merely shielding her from harm to helping her rebuild what had been shattered. Every step of her recovery was one I walked with her, quietly holding her hand when she stumbled, offering encouragement when she doubted herself. I understood, now more than ever, that healing wasn't a straight path. It was a winding road with setbacks, but each day Sarah found a little more strength to keep walking forward. For me, this journey of healing was a transformation as well. I had faced the rage, the fear, and the heartbreak, but in helping Sarah heal, I found my own healing too. No longer consumed by the anger of betrayal, I could see the woman my daughter was becoming, strong, resilient, and full of potential. And in seeing her rise from the ashes of her trauma, I found the courage to let go of my own past and look forward to a future where we both could live free from fear, and with hope on the horizon. The scars of the past would never disappear, but they no longer held us captive. Together, Sarah and I learned that recovery wasn't just about surviving, it was about reclaiming joy, piece by piece, and finding strength in the moments that once seemed impossible to reach. As I sit here today, watching the sun rise over the horizon, I can't help but reflect on how far Sarah and I have come. The road we traveled wasn't easy, it was filled with pain, fear, and moments when we thought we couldn't continue. But each step we took, no matter how small, brought us closer to freedom. A freedom that, for so long, seemed out of reach. Now, though, it feels like the first breath of fresh air after a long, suffocating night. The battle for justice was long and exhausting. It was more than just a fight for the truth, it was a fight to reclaim our lives, to rebuild everything that had been broken. There were times when the weight of it all threatened to crush me, but I kept moving forward. Every photograph, every piece of evidence, every moment of courage from Sarah was a step toward something better. And in the end, when the final verdict was read, I found peace, not just because we won, but because we had done the right thing. The scars left by Robert's actions, the betrayal, the violence, they'll never completely fade. The emotional wounds are deep, and though we've moved on, there will always be that shadow in our lives. Yet, I no longer see that shadow as a sign of defeat. It's a reminder of our strength, our resilience, and the unbreakable bond between a mother and her daughter. Sarah and I are beginning a new chapter now. It's not perfect. It's not without its struggles. But we are free. Free from fear, free from lies, and free from the chains that once held us back. And while the road ahead won't always be easy, it will be ours to walk, with heads held high and hearts full of hope. But as I sit here, looking back on everything, I wonder, what would you do in my place? If you were the one forced to choose between silence and speaking out, between fear and justice, what path would you take? I'm genuinely curious to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below and let me know. And if you've made it this far, I truly appreciate you staying with me through this journey. If you found strength in this story, or if you think someone else might need to hear it, don't forget to give a like and subscribe. Your support means everything, and I'm so grateful to have shared this part of my life with you. Thank you for listening. And remember, justice may be slow, but with courage, it always finds its way.